Hey all, Professor Wyman here with a video on collapsing categories. I'm going to start by talking about conceptually what I mean by collapsing categories, and then I will recode in SPSS. And then I'll also show you collapsing scores and recoding in SPSS for that as well. So first of all, imagine that you start with a nominal level or ordinal level of measurement variable where you have categories and you have a lot of categories. Collapsing categories, the idea is that you are reducing the number of categories when it's not necessary to have that many categories, or when it obscures the story of the data by having that many categories. So sometimes it's for accuracy. Sometimes it is just to make it more consumable for whoever is consuming the information. But you want to make sure that you're not hiding information. You need to be really thoughtful about your process for this. And I know that I personally, when I do contract work for data analysis, I come across this issue where somebody gives me data that they've collected, and the way that it was collected is problematic, where maybe instead of using categories that you could select, they did open-ended and there's 5,000 responses, and you have to figure out how to deal with that much information when you have misspellings and you have all sorts of other problems with the data. It could be that you had options to select, but then you also had an other option with just a place where you could enter your own answer. And maybe they weren't very clear in the survey how you were supposed to respond. So race and ethnicity, nationality, that one's really easy to mix up because people aren't always clear on the differences between those different categories. And so you need to be really clear in your questions. So if you get data back that you didn't generate, it's possible that you might have extra work there. Or likely that you'll have extra work there. So here I have an example. I have some original categories for race ethnicity. The way that this data was collected, and this is just from a small survey, the way that this data was collected was that there were certain categories. So there was American Indian, Alaska Native, Asian, Black or African American, Pacific Islander, and then Hispanic white and non-Hispanic white. And then there was also this other option where you could type in an other response. And so what happened was that people wrote in Chinese, Hmong, Japanese, Native Hawaiian, Samoan. And so those really could fit under smaller categories. Now, you could leave this, you could say that you want to show those differences, but the problem here is that people who selected Asian might fit into this Chinese or Hmong or Japanese, and they just decided to click that box. So for the sake of accuracy, it would make more sense to combine these. And then perhaps you might note in your response that the majority of participants in this category indicated they were Chinese. So here, I could take all of my Asian, Chinese, Hmong, Japanese, and I could fit this under this umbrella of Asian. So I could collapse these 4 categories into one. And I can do the same thing for this, where Native Hawaiian and Samoan would fit under Pacific Islander. And what I chose to do is I used the, I used the categories that are in the census. So the categories that are in the census are typically American Indian, Alaska Native, Asian, Black or African American, Native Hawaiian, Pacific Islander, Hispanic white, and non-Hispanic white. You do also have 2 or more races, different things like that. But for the sake of simplicity, I left it like this. So you can see how, again, you're collapsing these multiple categories into one. So I cannot say this enough, that you need to be very thoughtful about this process. You want to make sure that you're not hiding patterns in the data that might be there. So this should really fit your purpose of research, and it should fit your research question, and make sure that you're not going to be misleading anybody by combining these categories. So I'm going to go ahead and switch over into SPSS and show you how to do this recoding process. Here I am in SPSS. You can see that I have race, ethnicity, racial ethnic identification, and job satisfaction here. So let's take a look at our variable view, just to make sure that we know what's happening here. You can see that our values are set up. And I always go back and check and I look and make sure that this matches the information that I have in my code book or whatever information I have. So this matches. I have my numbers that are assigned as values to each of these different categories. And they're set up correctly here as well. The measure is listed as nominal for race ethnicity, which is correct. And then my job satisfaction is measured on a scale. So if I click into my data, you can see that I have my race ethnicity and my job satisfaction. I have numbers for job satisfaction. I have numbers for race ethnicity, but if I click on my value labels button, you can see how they break down. And they're currently sorted alphabetically. So I could do a quick descriptive analysis of this. I could go ahead and do a right click and descriptives. And you can see here that we have the frequency and percent of each of these categories. So it's always good to double click or double check your data and make sure that you have the correct information. So what I want to do is I need to combine my categories. I need to make it so that Asian, Chinese, Hmong, and Japanese are all going to be in the same category. I'm going to call that category Asian. So there's a couple different ways you can do this. You might want to set up your variable ahead of time. So I'm going to say race, ethnicity. I'm just going to use fixed, just for, again, obvious simplicity. I'm going to change my decimals to 0, and I'm going to call this my new, let's just copy this. You know, I like my efficient laziness. And paste. Okay, so this is my new racial ethnic identification. And I'm going to put my values in now. So 1 is going to be American Indian, Alaska Native. And of course, I could do this in syntax, but I'm not going to do that in this video. And 2nd should be Asian. 3rd should be Black or African American. Never type when I'm recording myself. And my Native Hawaiian, Islander. 5 is going to be Hispanic white. 6 is going to be non-Hispanic white. Ooh. And I'm going to say, okay. So now I have this in here. I can really easily check to make sure that what I want to change actually was effective. So here we need to take our values for race ethnicity and recode them correctly into our race ethnicity that's fixed. So I'm going to go to transform and I'm going to recode into different variables because I'm going to recode from one variable into a different variable. And I want to take my race ethnic identification. Oh, and I'm going to change that. So notice that that is listed as scale. Just change that. It's unknown. I'm going to change my new one to nominal. There we go. So transform, recode into different variables. And I'm going to right click to display my variable names. And I want to take my RE and I'm going to put it into my RE fixed. And I want to spell it exactly the same way as the variable that I set up. It already has a label, so I'm not going to add a label. I'm going to say change. And notice that it says this variable name duplicates an existing variable name. It's just because I created it ahead of time. You don't have to do it that way. You can certainly add your labels afterward. It's really up to you. So I'm going to say, okay. What I want to do for my old and new values is I need to take my old categories and put it into my new categories. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. And you can see that I have my old grouping here. So I have this 1 is going to stay 1, right? So American Indian Alaska Native is going to stay 1. But what I need to do is I need to say that 2 through 5 are going to become my new category 2. So 1 is going to stay 1. I'll add that. Then I can use this range, and I'm going to say 2, and again, through 5 in my old variable are going to become 2 and add. And so that says 2 through 5 will become a 2. Then I need to change my 6 to become a 3. So I'll go back to value, 6 becomes a 3. I want these 3 to all become 4, right? So I have my Native Hawaiian Pacific Islander. So I want my 7, 8, and 9 to become 4. So I'm going to go back to range. So 7 through 9 are going to become 4. So you can see 1, 2, or 1, 2, 3, 4. We're covering all of our numbers. And then we want to move 10 to become 5, and then 11 to become 6. So we're going to go back to our value. So 10 becomes 5, and 11 becomes 6. And you just want to take a minute to make sure that you captured all the values. So you can just double check that and say continue. And then I'm going to say, okay. So here, you can see that we double click over here, we now have our new categories. And the benefit of changing them into a different variable rather than recoding into the same one is that it's a lot cleaner. We can check and say, oh yeah, look, those match. We've got American Indian, Alaska Native, we're on those top 3. And then we can see that Asian is Asian, Chinese is now Asian, Japanese is now Asian, Hmong is now Asian, Black or African American stayed the same. We can just look at this and visualize that this was done correctly. So that is how you would collapse categories in SPSS. Let's go ahead and return to the slideshow, and I'll talk about collapsing a score and then come back to SPSS. So my second example is collapsing scores. You might have created a score and you actually want to use that score to make categories. This should be decided ahead of time. So this isn't something that you should do with your data just to find a significant result. That's p-hacking and you don't want to do that. But there are times when it fits the literature or it fits the purpose of your research to do this. So as an example, I have the general job satisfaction scale. And you can see that there's 10 questions where people are supposed to indicate their level of agreement. So we have a psychological construct. And what we're trying to determine is we have a score for each person. We have a score ranging from, because each individual question is 1 through 5, and there's 10 of them, we have scores that are going to range from 5 to 50. So the way that this is set up, McIntyre and McDonald and McIntyre set up categories so that low satisfaction or very low job satisfaction had a certain number associated with it. So they said that 10 through 25 is, that 10 through 26 is very low job satisfaction. 27 through 31 is low. 32 through 38 is average. 39 through 41 is high. And 42 through 50 is very high. So what we can do is using very similar process to what we just did, we can go ahead and create categories from our numbers. So this is another use for collapsing scores in this case. I'm going to go ahead and switch back over into SPSS. Here we are back in the same data set, and you can see that we have job satisfaction here, and it's a number. So I'm just going to run a quick descriptives on this. And you can see that we have our mean, our median. We have our range here, ranges from a minimum of 10 to a maximum of 50. So our range is 40 between those two. We have a pretty high standard deviation. And what we're going to look at here is we're going to identify, we need to create new categories. So I'm going to go to variable view, and actually this time I'll go ahead and set it up without doing the variable ahead of time. So let's say that I want to transform. I'm going to recode into different variables again. And this time I'm going to reset this so I can clean it all up. I'll just go ahead and move my job satisfaction over, and I want to make this my, I'm going to say JS categories. And I'll add a label to it. So job satisfaction categories. So in my old and new values, I'm going to do some ranges. So just as a reminder, our ranges, our first range was 10 through 26, and that was very low job satisfaction. So I'm going to make that a 1. That's my lowest level of job satisfaction. So I'm going to say add. And then my next one is 27 through 31. 27 through 31. I'm going to make that 2. So I'm just going to go in order from lowest to highest job satisfaction. And then my next range is going to be 32 through 38. And that's going to become 3. And then 39 through 41. Ooh. So is going to become 4. And then 42 through 50 is going to become our highest job satisfaction category. We're going to add that. So now when I press continue and I say, okay, you can see that I've executed my recode here. Let's look at our data. I now have these categories, right? So you can see categories, but if I press the values button, nothing happens. And that's because I need to add values to it. Now you can do this in syntax very easily. You can use your variable name, and you can change the, variable labels, and you can change the, or value labels. Man, can't talk today. You change your value labels in syntax by saying value labels and then the name of the variable and change them. But we're just going to do it here. So we just need to do 1 is our very low. And then 2 is our low. 3 is our average. And you just want to match this to the literature or whatever information you're basing the categories on. High. 5 is very high. And add. So now I have my categories here. It really bothers me when there's decimals and there shouldn't be, so I'm going to remove those. And then you can see now that the categories are there. And there you have it. So again, this process allowed us to take a score. So an individual who scored a 28, for example, would move into this low category. So recoding in SPSS can be used for a variety of different ways. These are just 2 examples, but you want to identify conceptually what you need to do with your data and then decide how to manage that in SPSS. One last note is that typically I always go back and do descriptive statistics to check my frequencies and make sure that they match so that I can see if those categories were correctly allocated. So that's it for this video.